Good afternoon, welcome back. The next panel is the green energy transition in Serbia and Europe. This panel is as anticipated as it was very dynamic even in preparation, so I guess the expectations are high, not to put the pressure on the participants, and they are Šimon Kardaš, Senior Policy Fellow within the European Power Program, European Council on Foreign Relations, Jovan Rajic, President of the Board of Directors, Renewables and Environmental Regulatory Institute, Johanna Sidov, Senior Advisor, Resource Policy, German Watch, Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and this panel will be moderated by Stevan Vujasinovic, Executive Director of RES Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone and welcome to our panel. In the interest of time, also we have some time pressures to deal with. One of our panelists needs to leave for a flight out of Belgrade. So if I'm speaking quickly, I hope you will forgive me. We want to keep Mr. Kardaš to the end of the panel, the session that we're having. So let's start the conversation by painting a contextual framework for the topic that you probably saw in the introduction to the panel, the evolving story of lithium exploration in Serbia. And before we turn to details of the project itself, I am inviting Mr. Kardaš to give us a broader introduction into the energy transition issues that are driving the demand for lithium or driving the development of lithium projects, not just in Serbia, but also elsewhere. So, Šimon, please give us a broader picture on where are we with energy transition globally and in Europe, and how this is impacting potential projects like the lithium exploration in Serbia.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really glad and privileged to take part in this discussion. The green transition or the energy transition is one of the key challenges that not only the European Union is facing, but also other countries in Europe. And I would say this is a challenge that also some important global actors are facing, like the United States, like China. And of course, there are different pillars of this energy transition, because I mean the aim of the process is to transform economies. And critical raw materials, and lithium is one of them, is truly important in terms of the energy transition agenda. And when we talk about the industries or sectors that are driving the demand for lithium, it is related to sectors like vehicle industry, the electric vehicles, since many countries are planning to phase out combustion engines, so it's of critical importance in this respect. But also lithium is important in terms of the projects that are aimed at energy storage. So I mean, these are the examples of sectors that would be driving the demand. And of course, we are facing different projections regarding the growth of demand. But according to some of them, the global demand may rise by 2040 even 40 times, according to some predictions. And the battery lithium demand, I mean, when we talk about batteries, is projected to increase tenfold in the perspective of the next decade. And just to finish, I mean, this first intervention with some kind of a global picture, I mean, nowadays, 95% of the total production of lithium is concentrated in just four countries, which is Australia, Chile, China, and Argentina. And of course, I mean, but when we talk about the reserves, of course, there are some countries which also have reserves of lithium. And in the European Union, among the leading countries are Germany and the Czech Republic. But also there are significant, of course, reserves in Serbia, around 1.3% of the global reserves. So that's why we talk about Serbia when it comes to lithium as one of the critical raw materials.
Thank you so much. And I guess the audience must have picked up on the fact that 95% of current reserves not being in any EU or European setting. So that's a good introduction for me to invite Johanna to give us a broader look into this growing demand through the lens of the critical resources and the evolving legislation at the EU level.
Yeah, what we can see at the moment that like the topic of raw materials is really on the rise. Like there's a lot of attention on it, especially since the aggression of Russia on the Ukraine. People noticed, oh, we really have to change our strategy. There has been a change in strategy. Instead of forcing China to give out their resources and using trade policies to get access to the resources, it's rather they aim to get more independent from China. And most of raw materials are processed in China, even though not all of them are mined in China. Most of them go to China and are processed there. So there's at the moment a real need or real aim to shift this raw materials policy. So there is a big demand in raw materials outside of China. A lot of, in March, Ursula von der Leyen announced the Critical Raw Materials Act with the words, the race is on. And I think that's what we experience at the moment. There's a race for raw materials. There also is, for example, the strategic minerals partnership with different countries like Australia, Canada, US, Germany, EU, all trying to gather together and to see how they can access resources. And the Critical Raw Materials Act at EU level tries to push for more mining also within EU. It tries to get 40 to 50% of processing within the EU countries, so to not depend on the processing being made in other countries. And it also aims, for example, for more recycling, but the aim is really to push all these facilities, recycling, processing, and mining facilities in Europe but outside of Europe. So there will be a boom in this regard, a real push for that. And what we see in this context also a bit with a fear that a lot of standards that have been established in the past, there was the batteries regulation, which set some standards, specifically also for lithium production. And there's supply chain legislations at the moment, and there are standards, water standards, and etc., that these policies, this rush might actually threaten these and somehow, weaken the standards that we have at the moment.
Thank you. So just reiterate two, I think, key phrases so far. The demand will grow and the race is on. So given these two phrases, I turn to Jovan to actually now come back to Serbia and give us an introductory look into the actual progress of the lithium project in Western Serbia. A lot has been said, but then there's also beneath the public debates and the discourse around the project, there is obviously a legal procedure to developing the project. So I'll ask you to give us an introduction to exactly where the project stands as it is now.
Thank you. And thanks to the organizers for the invitation, of course. So to reflect to what the previous panelists said, we fully understand the needs of the market and the future development in this field. We fully understand the recent development related to decree on the critical raw materials and everything what is happening at the moment. However, we firmly believe that the decisions related to this project has to be adopted with consideration and with the influence of all stakeholders involved in the process. First of all, citizens who are affected with this project, then the expert community. Of course. Also with the government and the political decisions which has to represent and which have to take into consideration the best interest of those people, of their health, and of the national interests of Serbia before everything. So far, we don't have, unfortunately, feeling that this is what's happening. When you ask about the current situation and the current status of this project, we have two different pictures that we get. One is official one, and one is the act in the field. As you probably all know, the project is currently suspended as we don't have the urban and spatial base for realization of this project, and we don't have, apparently it was stopped by the political decision. But on the other side, all relevant signs and aspects on the field shows that the project never stopped. We have recent, like 2 weeks ago, we have this situation with the demolition of houses within the mining field where the project will be realized. And logical question, you don't have to be expert, you just have to ask the logical question, why would the investor, despite the fact that they have the permit for demolition of the houses, despite the fact that they have ownership on the houses, which we gained before by purchasing those, why would they clear the field if they don't intend to execute the project further? So to conclude with this, I think what we missed here and what we lack here is a transparent and comprehensive inclusion of all relevant stakeholders in the process, and a transparent government which renders its decision based on the best interest of their people and of the state. I'm afraid we don't have that at the moment.
Okay, thank you for those introductory remarks. You made a point that is also a good introduction to my next question, which is planning at national level. We understand the global nature of growing demand for lithium, but obviously this particular project and resource also needs to be placed within the Serbian national context as well, in terms of where does Serbia stand in terms of energy transition itself. So that's a good point to come back to you with a question on, given your perspective of where Serbia and perhaps in the entire region, there's a lot of similarities, where are we with energy transition in this particular region and in Serbia specifically, and where you see key challenges that need to be addressed in planning for energy transition in Serbia, and then we'll come back to where the lithium project sits with the national policy context.
Mm-hmm. Following on the point that Jovan made, the green transition or energy transition can be successful only then when it's just, and just means inclusive. If you listen to some decision makers in the European Union, at least some of them, address this issue very clearly, because otherwise, there is no chance for success. And when we talk about the key challenges of the energy transition, I would like to elaborate on this issue through the prism of 4 categories that we included in a special tool that was launched in the ECFR. We called it the Energy Sovereignty Index. We were trying, to elaborate what does it mean to be truly energy sovereign in a modern way. And we used 4 categories, which are as follows: cleanness, dependency or independence, energy efficiency, and narrative. And when it comes to cleanness, I mean, we refer this category in the first place to the renewables capacity, but also to the share of fossil fuels in the energy mix or the electricity generation. And in this respect, of course, one of the key challenges that refers to Serbia is the high share of coal in the electricity generation and relatively small share of renewables in this respect. Of course, we can count the hydro power as an element of it, but we know that it's not, I mean, sometimes it's not perceived as purely clean. So, I mean, there are clearly challenges related to the cleanness category. There are also some challenges related to the category which we named independence, because, I mean, we know that, for instance, when it comes to natural gas supplies, Serbia is still, to a large extent, dependent on supplies from the Russian Federation, although we know that there are some attempts, I mean, to decrease this level of dependence. One of the biggest challenges, of course, related to Serbia, but also to other countries in the region, is the question of the energy efficiency. And this is also something that countries in the European Union are struggling with, especially taking into account the fact of more ambitious goals that were set up by the European Union till 2030. And finally, I mean, the last category that we included in the tool, which I believe is also relevant when it comes to Western Balkans and in Serbia as well, it's the narrative. I mean, it's the proper narrative. So, I mean, the country, the decision makers, politicians, I mean, need to advocate for the energy transition and to sell it to the public as something which is actually necessary and that may bring benefits in the long-term perspective. This is of crucial importance, and because otherwise, I mean, the whole transition concept, if we do not include the society, if we do not show that actually we might gain benefits from it, I mean, the whole process cannot succeed.
Keywords: inclusion, participation, and benefits. So what's the issue then? It's a good introduction back to Johanna to tell us, from what you've heard so far and what you know about the prospect of lithium exploration in Serbia, is this a curse or a blessing? And why is there resistance, at least in the local community, to projects like this?
Yeah, I think I can give you a long answer. There's so many dimensions to this. But I think, first of all, like looking at different dimensions, if we look at we had a lot of coal mining in Germany, and still now, if you look at it, there's huge costs of pumping out the water from, and keeping the water level there. So even now, although the mine is closed, it's still costing a lot. So that's one economic dimension. And if you, and I think key, for a mining project to take place, mining always has irreversible impacts, always. And if you then look that if regulation is not in place, probably, like we saw yesterday, we went to Jada to look to see the impacts there. And if you see that regulation there, you need really, really strong regulation and strong push to really see that regulation is put in place. Otherwise, I think mining really can end in a disaster. If, for example, we see that the deposit for the location of the tailing deposit is moved closer to the river because it's of benefit for the company to decrease the cost, it's really, really alarming signs. Like knowing that there's a risk for flooding in the region and that that we know these tailings are really, really toxic. It's a big risk. And then also looking internationally at examples from in Brazil that dams broke and having these risks. I think we really need strong regulations in place. Otherwise, there is risk for the disaster. And as we see it at the moment, I think it's really worrisome. And also, if you look, for example, to Australia, where there is similar lithium mining as it would happen here, Also there you can see that there has been, although they have quite strong implementation of regulation, you see that there's leakages happening, intoxicating the groundwaters. You see big fears also for dam breaks and also emissions causing health problems for population. So I can't say that I would see it a blessing. I think it's a huge risk and challenge. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That calls for strict compliance with strong regulations. Jovan.
And I think what is very important, there always have to be in regions where you can't mine. Like there are regions where the risk is so high, so you can't mine there. So I think that's really important to consider as well.
I'm using this kind of keywords as introduction to the next question, but also to kind of put an accent to key messages. Compliance with strict compliance with strong regulation. What has been Serbia's track record when it comes to mining, not specifically just to lithium, but I know that you have been involved with monitoring compliance with mining legislation elsewhere. What has been the track record so far, and what can we learn from it?
Well, actually, they're not even that strong. Are we requesting too much to comply with even those not so strong legal and regulatory framework? Just to clarify in one sentence before answering to your question, our doubts in good intentions are based on our current experience and the lessons learned so far in Serbia. So this is not the only project that contains same doubtful measures and decisions that wasn't seen previously. For example, in cases of Zijin Copper in Bor, Linglong in Zrenjanin. So the concept of so-called salami slicing of environmental sensitive projects is seen before in practice in the world and also in Serbia. So it's nothing new. It is, I don't want to use this too strong words, but it is insulting to the competent public and experts when somebody thinks that it could be executed once again without noticing that by the expert community and without challenging that in front of the court and in front of administrative authorities. So once again, our caution is based on our experience, not in the stories and fairy tales. Next, related to decision-making process and inclusion of the interested public, we couldn't see that so far in this project. When I say previously about the salami slicing, you cannot say that the issue of wastewaters and the issue of drilling and the pumping the water from Drina River are separate projects and are not in a heavy connection with each other. So we have to use that and we have to think about that as a unique project. And if you have a good intention, you will say that, you will put that on the paper, and then you will consult interested public and see what the best possible decision is. That didn't happen once again. The project was stopped by the political decision and the political will. As it stopped, it could be continued. So it's again up to political decision. This is not the right path. This is not the path based on a legal framework. And one more fact in short, it is particularly dangerous to create parallel legal system for the projects that are declared by the government as the projects of national interest. We've seen that in the previous 2 years several times with the law on mining, with the law on renewable energy, with the law on lining infrastructure. So this is hopefully we will have the chance to talk about that later in more details, but it's very dangerous to neglect your own legal system and to choose the investors which will not be obliged to respect the national legal system. Instead, you create parallel legal system for those investors that you choose as such.
I have one further question, especially related to the mining law, which you mentioned. And that's perhaps also illustrative for members in our audience who may not remember or may not know about the mass protest that concluded with a 40,000 signature initiative to the parliament to amend the mining law, if I'm not mistaken, by introducing a moratorium on lithium exploration. Can you just perhaps give us a picture of what is the outcome of the 40,000 signatures being officially submitted to Parliament by way of requesting amendments to the mining law?
To be honest, I don't know what happened with the signatures. Last thing I heard from official explanation is that they were lost. Where, how, I don't know. But this is particularly what I'm saying about inclusion of all stakeholders. Those 38,000 of people are very relevant stakeholders. So it seems to me that nobody asked them. I'm not saying this should be the only evidence and only thing that the decision should be made based on. But I'm saying they are also relevant stakeholders to talk with them, not to insult them by saying we lost the signatures.
Thank you. And we're right where we are in terms of timing, where we need to be in terms of timing. So we can conclude this introductory phase and just open the discussion to less facts of the lithium case project and energy transition in Serbia, but perhaps give more of an opinion on what are the critical aspects going forward. So I'll go back to Johanna, or also with a broader picture, not just in Serbia, with this question. Are we in fact in danger of really missing the opportunity of energy transition by changing our habits as consumers, by changing our patterns of behavior in a variety of sectors such as transport? Because it looks like we're just looking for a different material to fuel our existing habits. If we are going to continue the existing patterns of behavior in car manufacturing, are we missing an opportunity of a broader change that would have more of the just transition qualities and more effectiveness in terms of where all this is coming from, in terms of decarbonizing our economies and making sure that we move forward in a sustainable way? Very briefly, are we replacing the injustices of the fossil fuel in the present? Are we in danger of creating renewable injustices in this new kind of energy transition-induced renewable future that we're talking about?
Yes. I think to the first, I think there's different aspects to the question. Like the first one, do we just continue our habits with the new materials? I would definitely say yes, that's what is happening at the moment. And I think it's an illusion to say if you look at the demands needed of lithium for electric cars and all the impacts of raw materials globally, we can't just continue as we do. We can't replace every fossil fuel-based car with an electric car. I think we just have to rethink it. We need smaller cars. The opposite what we're seeing at the moment, we just see cars size increase. We need to have smaller cars. We need to think about how to produce batteries smaller, in a smaller way, and to really strengthen public transport. Of course, you can't, in some places you need cars, but in some places like big cities, you can think of really different systems of transport, and there really has to be investment there and a lot of will to change it. And there are some studies, for example, from university in the US, Climate and Community Project. They have shown that, really increasing public transport, decreasing the size of batteries, you can save huge amounts of lithium. So I think we really have to think about that raw materials. At the moment, we just think they're limited. But then we forget about all the impacts that they have. I'm always using the example of gold. It's like you can look at different materials and it's always similar, a bit different in size. But only the gold we have in our smartphones produces 100 kilogram of disposal, like waste material. That's just showing the size, and it uses a lot of water. So we really, although the material as such might not be limited, all the sources around it are limited, so we really have to rethink, and we have to reduce our mining to bare minimum, think about more recycling options, but using things long term, thinking how we can shrink things, but really how we think about different systems. And I think the transport system is a system where you really, the solution is on the hand. It just has to be implemented.
Thank you. My next question continues on this path of easing the pressure, as it were, or of what can be done to actually use the opportunities of the energy transition. And my question here is, at least the angle from which I want to approach my next question for you is, where are the potential avenues other than the changing patterns of demand in transport, etc.? How else can we integrate geographies, markets, policy frameworks in the region with the EU to make the challenges of a renewable energy system easier to overcome?
Well, clearly the cooperation and regional cooperation is one of the things that we definitely need to think about when it comes to the energy transition and expecting some kind of a broader effect from individual energy transitions conducted in individual states. And I would like to make in this respect 3 points. I mean, first of all, of course, what is needed is the political will. And it's not only the question of the political will to pursue a course aimed at energy transition, I mean, domestically, but also, I mean, there needs to be a political will to cooperate. And I think that this is something that it's still, I mean, missing, at least when it comes to, well, probably not only when it comes to the energy sector, but energy sector is one of the illustrations. Secondly, and to provide some examples, I mean, secondly, we need to think about gaining, as the final effect, some kind of a synergy. Because sometimes, I mean, we have the impression, and we observe it, for instance, in the European Union, that when countries individually are making decisions regarding the expansion of the energy infrastructure, whether it is related to interconnectors or new LNG terminals, we are facing the challenge of stranded assets in, let's say, next decade or maybe next 15 years. And this is something that
Perhaps I can invite you to just define the notion of a stranded asset, perhaps, for
yeah, okay.
people outside of the energy sector.
Yeah, so I mean, this is basically the asset that, well, maybe it's needed right now, and maybe we can utilize it right now because, I mean, there's a huge demand for natural gas or crude oil in certain country or group of countries, but in next decade, let's say, I mean, it might occur that, I mean, having 5 new LNG terminals in the northern Europe is actually not necessary, taking into account the demand. Yeah? So what I'm advocating for, what I would be advocating for, is to cooperate. I mean, in order to avoid the situation of stranded assets. Maybe not all gas interconnectors are needed. Maybe not all new links that are planned to connect one country with the other in order to buy crude oil. As we know, I mean, right now Serbia is planning the connection with Hungary in order to import Russian crude oil through the Druzhba pipeline. So we need to think about those projects in a way that could allow us to gain some kind of a synergy effect. And here, I mean, the cooperation would be badly needed. Moreover, I mean, we should also, I mean, when we talk about the region like Western Balkans, I mean, we should also include the factor of, let's say, third parties' energy policies and plans. I mean, for instance, here, Greece has very interesting plans regarding the increase of the production of electricity, green electricity, and plans to export it to the region, but also, I mean, to the European Union. So maybe it should be also taken into account while elaborating some domestic plans regarding the expansion of the infrastructure. And the final point, I mean, the final example, because I mean, we should also think about the cooperation in terms of strengthening ties between the region and the European Union. And one of the examples that is actually discussed sometimes recently is strictly linked to the question of the energy transition and the whole agenda that the EU is implementing, is the question of the ETS system. And well, on the one hand, there are proposals, I mean, to create a separate ETS system here.
Emissions trading system.
Exactly.
Forgive me.
But maybe the better idea would be to include countries of the region into the system that is working, that is developing within the framework of the European Union, as part of the agenda of strengthening cooperation between those countries and the European Union, and of course as a kind of a incentive that drives also, I mean, the transition here in the region.
Thank you. Let's pause here. I will use my role as moderator to try to sum up sort of key points that we have identified, and then invite our audience to direct our discussion in the remaining part of the panel. One metaphor that came to me is the pressure cooker. The pressure on a regulatory system in Serbia from all these factors driving the demand for lithium basically can be relieved by certain checks and balances, which would make the transition more possible, sustainable, more feasible, more inclusive, more just. Part of this is obviously making sure that we have strong regulations and at least begin by strict implementation of those that are already in place. Part of this will not be necessarily in single individual markets, it will be in our global commitment to changing our behaviors, patterns, in integrating different sectors into the energy transition. So far, most of the attention has gone into the energy sector, but we see the need to also look at transport. We have not mentioned agriculture and other sectors as well. And also, we saw conflicting ideas, or if like, or demands. On one hand, there are old notions of energy sovereignty or energy autonomy or being self-reliant in terms of resources, but on the other, the more we find room for cooperation and integration, the more we relieve the pressure for all the stakeholders in energy transition to find the right solutions. So with this in mind, with a kind of constant balance between what's happening in Serbia and with this particular lithium project, in a broader context, I stop here and I invite our audience to perhaps ask a question or two by introducing yourself and, if possible, directing your question. The more concise we are, the more people can participate. So thank you in advance for being very specific. We start on our right here.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Mirza Kapoor, head of No Immunity from Accountability Project. Two questions. The first one is that it's interesting and relevant that we haven't seen anything similar to protest as against Rio Tinto and lithium extraction in Serbia, comparing to some projects already mentioned, Chinese Zijin project in eastern Serbia, also Linglong Israeli city, and also, very importantly, against further deepening relationship of Serbian dependency on Russian fossil fuels. That's the ultimately political question. The second question is, how come the leaders of protests against lithium extraction in Serbia have adamantly nationalist stance on Kosovo? They're against Serbian Euro-Atlantic integrations and accuse Rio Tinto as being multinational company, globalization company under the auspices of the Australia, EU, and the NATO Pact. Thank you.
So those are two questions. I will try to sum them up and direct them to our panelists, and I will be looking at you just to make sure that I have your agreement in terms of how I'm summarizing them. So the first question is there a difference in how what we have talked about applies to projects depending on where the investors come from? Is that a fair way of posing this question to Jovan? So are these weaknesses that we have witnessed on the lithium project present in other mining projects, or is this a particularly challenging or visible issue specifically to this one project in particular?
Thank you. I don't see the difference, to be honest. I don't make it that way. I think what is common for all of these projects is that the reaction of the people is direct responsibility of the government, because the people did not have enough information on those projects. If there were good intentions from the government and from the investors, to be concrete, it is responsibility of the government, but it's also responsibility of the investors, then the people would have the debate, proper debate, on each step of this project, starting from the environmental impact assessment and the necessity to conduct one, and the issue of sending the comments and recommendations from the people, including them into all procedures. But when you have the factual status, which is as it is, as I explained before, and you have official position of the government as it is, then it is logical thing that people have some doubts, and then even sometimes making some decisions and concerns which are maybe not rational, but if they had the proper information in time, they wouldn't make these decisions. As I said, and I will finish with this, as I said, I see same pattern in acting of the state in all of these projects that you mentioned. So I expect the state to be guarantee that the process will be conducted transparently and in accordance with the law. On the side, I see the state who are helping investors to neglect the obligations from the laws, and as I said before, to create parallel legal system. This is not the proper path, and the divisions between the citizens and the state will be more deeper and will not end as long as the situation is as it is at the moment.
There was also a second question.
Yeah, I mean, actually the question is not responsible by the government, it's actually responsible by the leaders of the protest.
I'm sorry, I was getting to his next question. If you just allow me in the interest of time, the next question, I was about to reiterate your next question, which was the leaders of the protest.
But the first question also involved how come we didn't see the same protests against much worse project in Serbia, Chinese investment and deepening gas relationship with Russia.
Okay, you're now elaborating your first question. I understand it. So the question is about the leaders of the protest. Can we even answer, because some of these protests gathered dozens of thousands of people. I don't doubt that some of them have a leftist or rightist leaning, or west or east, or I honestly don't know. I don't know how to put this question to our panelists who may not be... I appreciate this, but these are broad terms. I don't know who you mean exactly. There are dozens of, and also, I struggle with this question. Does anybody, in all honesty, I don't want to avoid the question. I appreciate that there are people of many different affiliations and different sort of aspects of the political spectrum, also in terms of the geopolitical situation. But I honestly don't know if anybody wants to comment on this. I would respond to you, if I may, as a moderator, that it's a very diversified participation in the protest. And I find it very difficult to generalize to the extent that we say the opposition to this is unique in the sense that those opposing this... Okay. There will be just, perhaps somebody can participate from the audience. I try to maintain like the moderator's neutrality in the issue. I know dozens of leaders and many of them don't suit. So maybe you can have make a comment. But I ask you to be concise as much to the extent that you can, so that we also have other perspectives. And
yes, thank you. I'm really concise, usually. So I'm one of the leaders of the protests, and I'm on the left spectrum, left part of the spectrum, political spectrum in Serbia. I'm the co-president of the leftist Green party Zajedno, so I cannot be accounted as a right-wing political activist here in Serbia, so it is not a correct question. Also, I have to say that people also in East Serbia also have their protests. We also help them to encourage them to protest even for the Xi and other Chinese. So don't. No, it is not small, but it is different because of the western of Serbia, there are more people, demography is like that. On the eastern part of Serbia, there are less people, much less people. They're not well organized, that I can say, but we support them. We are going there. We help them to make their protests, so it is not a right question. So there is no right-wing, just right-wing, essentially, protests against Rio Tinto and not against Chinese companies. That is not correct. I can prove it.
Thank you. And we can continue the discussion in a less formal fashion afterwards. I would just add that there is also one other difference in the sense that coal mining projects in the East have been around for a century. And here we're talking about a brand new project. So there is kind of, this is already water under the bridge, and maybe that's one of the difference, not necessarily the political arena. But I appreciate the complexity of the issue and the diversity of participation in the protest. We have to leave it there for now to be fair to other participants and ask others to participate. So I think I saw a hand over there. So there you go, sir. The mic is right behind you. Short, concise, and hopefully who you direct your question to.
Very short. Aleksandar Vukalovic, lithium, about lithium. Water, food, air, and health is by the law separate national critical infrastructure. Lithium in Serbia is critical infrastructure for government. It's big difference. We must have that in mind. One question.
Thank you.
Green energy demands mounts of technology. How serious must be cybersecurity in that case? Thank you.
Can you just repeat for me to make sure that I understood the question? Green transition requires what kind of technology? Mountains of technology, a lot of technology. Okay, I will use the opportunity to perhaps interpret your question like this. In addition to all the challenges we have identified already, there is also the encroachment of the digital transformation. In Europe, there is increasing talk of so-called twin transition, which also includes security aspects. Does anybody feel comfortable on the panel to say a few words about also the security challenges to a change that we are witnessing coming from the digital world? And I hope that if we don't have a contribution, I hope we are forgiven because we had a slightly different focus from our panelists. Let's hear some more questions, and maybe we come back to this later. There is another question in the back row.
Good afternoon, Jelena Pejčnikić, researcher at the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. I just wanted to ask Mr. Ajic, and perhaps others would like to contribute too, how does this whole story, of course the Rio Tinto was the more prominent, fit in the EU enlargement process of Serbia? What was the role and reaction of the EU? Since in the enlargement process, in the accession process, you tackled issues of course, environmental protection, but also rule of law. What was the EU's reaction, and what would you expect it to be? Has it been an ally to address your demands and your alarms regarding these issues? Thank you.
Go ahead, Jovan.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. To be completely honest, I expected the more firm and more stronger message from the EU in that sense. Because if we set the rule of law as one of fundamental principles in the EU accession process, and it is, as I know so far, then we have a huge discrepancy between what's the set as one of the key elements of the accession process and what we have on the field. And what we have on the field is this process that we have. Also, to connect with the previous question, I don't make differences between the projects, by the way, where the investor and the investments come from. I have only two expectations from my government and from the investors. From the investors to comply with the regulatory framework of this country, no matter where they are coming from. And from the government to protect this legal framework that they rendered, that they have left or rendered in force, and to protect public interest, which is the main and the basic principle for each government. So are we looking for too much? I don't think so. This is something that every state, when we talk about the EU, every state in the EU wants that and respect these basic decisions. So the rule of law is very endangered by this process, and I don't want, as I said, and I want to underline once again, I'm not interested in the fact where the investments come from, and I don't want to defend the projects because they are coming from the EU or outside the EU. This is the only and the basic facts that I'm interested in.
Thank you. I'm looking to the audience just to see if there are any more hands up. Go ahead, Tibor. And we'll make that our last question before a round of conclusions.
Hi, I have a question for Johanna. So in Serbian society, we often hear argument or actually counter-argument that the biggest reserves, and also Simon said that, of lithium are in Germany and in Czech Republic. So since you're coming from Germany, can you maybe inform us or get us a bit more familiar with the situation in Germany, what is happening now with lithium, exploration, researches and everything, what is happening now? Because we often hear in Serbia this argument, yes, they have the biggest reserves, but I mean, they don't do anything. So is it really true, or Germany started actually exploring or doing something with the ore? Thanks.
Yeah, there are two different deposits, one in the northeast and one in the south. And the south is a different methodology with thermal water, and from that you have heard more about. And then the one in the rather east, there's very little discussions on it. And I think it's also because environmental standards are higher, and then it's more difficult to extract, and the costs are much higher. So it's, there isn't much discussion on it at the moment. The Critical Raw Materials Act, though, wants to increase mining within Europe, so within the EU. So this could maybe also change this pattern. I just wanted to go back to one of the discussion before. There's this year actually, the EU batteries regulation entered into force, and the EU batteries regulation puts quite high standards on also regarding water. And we know from the Yada project that water is a big issue. There's still no numbers about where the water will come from. Water always is a very huge issue in this regard. There's also standards regarding air pollution, etc. So this batteries regulation actually puts certain requirements to the production of raw materials for batteries, and it even doesn't allow batteries that don't comply to this criteria enter the European market. So really there has to be strong standards, and all these issues have to be considered to get access to the market. That's gonna, enter to force 2 years. But and then knowing that water issues are not solved yet, and there's a lot of, there come some question marks.
I will, unless I'm interrupting you, forgive me, I was looking at the clock. I want to give us a chance of a kind of final round of comments to conclude the panel with. Given your professional areas of interest and the project that you're working on now, can you, before we finish, use the opportunity to quite literally advertise or draw our audience's attention to moving forward to the challenges on the horizon that you see as key to resolving these and other issues related to energy transition. So let's start with Mr. Kardas. Where's your work focused, and what should we be on the lookout for over the coming years in terms of the news that will make these challenges smaller?
I mean, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we talk a lot about sovereignty, European sovereignty in different areas, and of course, with respect to energy. And I think that what is badly needed right now is to reframe this category, or underline that actually when we think about our own sovereignty in a long-term perspective, we should look at this term, at this category in a much broader sense. So not only, I mean, decreasing the level of dependence on fossil fuel supplies or diversification of sources of supplies, because, I mean, replacing Russia with Azerbaijan, I don't believe that it's necessarily the safest option. So we should think in a broader terms and think about strengthening sovereignty through the prism of the development of renewables, so making the energy systems cleaner and more energy efficient, because that is truly, I mean, strengthening the energy sovereignty in a longer run. And of course, the energy transition might be an important tool to strengthen the energy sovereignty in a long-term perspective. So we should perceive it as a huge opportunity. And of course, to collaborate as much as possible, not only here in the region, but between the region and the European Union, and also within the European Union. And the final point, I mean, we also need to, I mean, use, if it is a factor on the ground, we need to use, I mean, the public support for it. I mean, Poland is a very interesting example, because actually when you look at the polls, the majority of the society, more than 80 or sometimes 90%, are in favor of the transition. So, I mean, the decision makers should also, I mean, take it into account in order to move things forward.
Thank you. Johanna, when you go back, what will you take from Serbia and from these couple of days, and how will this reflect in your work, and what can we see on the horizon as your contribution to resolving some of the challenges that we have talked about?
Big question. I think what we have to remember sometimes that we always talk about only the raw materials that are used for transition, and then we forget that a lot of other sectors, like the construction sector, is also using up a lot of raw materials, and that there is chance to reduce raw materials consumption there. So I think water and land will become a big issue in this, and demand of raw materials is so high, so really have to look into reducing consumption and to see how we can get smart solutions for different sectors to decrease the consumption. And they are out there, but we still need more thinking into it, and we need to implement. For example, in Germany, we are fighting for legislation. We really would like to have some goals for reducing resource consumption, and then I think if you have this as a goal, you can think about in different sectors, how could you do it so you get a more fairer solution there? And I think we have to put our energy into thinking into this kind of solutions.
Thank you so much. And Jovan, perhaps, what's your next case? Where will we see you in legal action next? It doesn't have to be legal action, but I
can't talk about it.
Okay.
It's confidential. So if you allowed me just to reflect on the issue of energy transition in Serbia with two points only. One is that when we talk about the just and inclusive energy transition, and when we talk about decarbonization, in Serbia, we mostly talk about decarbonization of energy sector, with around 80% of GHG emissions coming from energy sector. I'm not saying the traffic, the individual households are not important. I'm saying about the elephant in the room, which is energy sector. So once again, we need a broader discussion, and we need a strategy. We talked a lot in the past about NECP, National Energy and Climate Plan.
I suspect you mean NECP.
Yes, exactly. So when we talk about this, we need sustainable and strategic approach on this. The deadline is, according to Sofia Declaration, 2050. This is the date when we have to close all thermal power plants. In order to do that, we need a strategy for the coal regions, for the people who will lose their jobs, who have to do something else in their lives. I don't see that we have strategy so far. And the second note is what my colleague said before, and I completely agree with that, related to ETS. When we talk about ETS, for those who are not coming from energy sector, when we talk about the CBAM, when we talk about ETS, we are talking about taxation of carbon emissions, which will be counted in billions of euros in the following period, which will heavily influence and affect the economies in the region. What I think here, and once again I completely agree with you, is the integration of the Western Balkan countries in the EU ETS. It was seen before with the Visegrad Group, and unfortunately I don't see the readiness, currently I don't see the readiness of the decision makers to include the Western Balkans in the EU ETS. All the expertise shows that the CBAM and the regional ETS, which somebody is suggesting at the moment, is not the solution, that we don't have liquid markets to do that, and the economies will be heavily affected. This is something to think about in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a custom for moderators to leave you with a concluding remark to perhaps help you remember our discussion. So I'll try to be very brief. When you think about what we talked about, I think you can classify all these contributions into one of the so-called 3 Ds of energy transition. The first one being decarbonization. The lithium story is just one small aspect of a national, regional, and European and global effort to decarbonize our societies. One that deals with energy storage, but that is much more complex than that. We talked about our energy needing to be clean. We need to use it efficiently. We need to change this perception of abundant energy that costs very little. So it's an important resource that we'll need to be more careful about in the future. The second D that we heard about, although it wasn't articulated in those terms, is whichever way you prefer, either democratization of energy or decentralization of energy. We're moving away from centrally planned energy systems and decentralizing them. More people are getting involved. And it's a challenge to build systems, regulatory frameworks, and capacities of stakeholders to participate in a way which can make energy transition inclusive, sustainable, possible to begin with. We heard about participation, about the need to be inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. I think all those words can be folded under democratization or decentralization, if you like. And the third one is an answer to you, or maybe a partial answer to you, and I kind of a personal interest of mine, I'm abusing my role as moderator, is digitalization. What we are seeing is a rapid pace of change. So the energy transition that we are talking about is not a static sort of category or a process, but rather the developments in policy, in technical capabilities, in our ability to balance renewable sources, to resolve a variety of challenges, are literally being improved every week. And I just want to use the opportunity to share with you that in the European Union, they estimate that up to a quarter of decarbonization targets can be achieved by artificial intelligence applications, by algorithms, new platforms for more efficient distribution of energy, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot to watch out for. My contribution is watch out for digitalization in energy as well. So 3 Ds. Thank you so much, and I think we're almost on time. Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists as well.